Hello all, this is Ben Falk for KillerSites.com. Let me briefly discuss what we've gone over so far in parts 1 and 2. At the moment, we are writing a small application which is able to view, edit, delete, and add new records to a database. And at the moment, we have view working, we can delete, and we can add new records. The only thing that we can't do is we can't edit them. If you click on edit at the moment, it takes us to the edit record page, but you'll notice these inputs do not have the correct values from the form. They should have test and test in them, and obviously they're blank. So let's go to records.php and do a little bit of editing and make this work. So first of all, we obviously check if the ID value is set in the URL. We know that we are editing an existing record. What we want to do here is we need to query the database and get the values for first name, last name, and ID. So what we can do is we know ID is set, but we need to check that ID is numeric. So if it's numeric, and we also want to check if the ID value is larger than 0. And if that's true, we want to go ahead and query the database. If it isn't true, if for some reason ID is set, but it's set incorrectly, maybe someone changed the URL somehow, let's go ahead and instead redirect users back. So we're going to go ahead and header this application. Okay, so that's going to send people back. So let's go ahead and briefly check this. So if we're editing, and then if we enter in random things, notice it redirects back to the view page. Okay, so that section is correct. Now let's actually set up the database query. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to set an ID value. So we pull the ID from the URL. And then similarly to what we did in the delete.php file, we're going to use prepared statements. And so we're going to do if and we want to prepare the statements. And in this case, we're going to do select star from players where ID equals question mark. Okay, so if this returns true, we can go ahead with the query. If it returns false, there's some sort of issue. So we're going to go ahead and say echo okay, so that's set. So now we need to go back up and we need to bind our parameters so this question mark gets replaced with actual data. So we do that, stmt bind param, and remember this first section of this function here refers to the type that we're passing in. In this case, we're passing an integer, so it's going to be I, and then we're going to pass in ID. Okay, so we bound the parameters, so it's ready to go. Now we just execute it. Now the second step, which we haven't discussed yet, is once we have this query successfully submitted, how do we get the results? In this case, we're going to do it by binding the results. And we use the bind results function, just result, no s on the end. And what we want is we want to include what variables we want to get back. So we want to get back the ID value, first name value, and the last name value. So, and then these variables refer to the columns in our table. So like such, and then we want to actually get these, so we use the fetch function. Okay, so what we do here is we have a query, we select from our players where ID equals certain value, we bind the parameters, so where ID equals the ID variable, and we execute it. And then to get the results back, we use the bind results function, and we ask for ID, first name, and last name back, and then we fetch that data, and then finally we're going to display our form with the data that we got. So we're going to include first name, last name, we want errors to be null, and then we want to include the ID value. And then finally, we want to make sure we close this. So we close out the statement. And let's check it, and this should work. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and edit Emily Adams. Looks like we have a little bit of an issue here. So we have our function. Oh, I see what it is. We forgot. I need to delete this, because what's happening is this is set, it is numeric, we get the information, we render the form, and then it gets down here and it renders the form a second time. So let me save this fresh, and you'll notice the values are being properly pulled from the database. If you want to go back and retrace this, we are getting the information from the database here. We're passing what we got from the database to the render form function. And if you go up here, you'll notice first and last are being passed into the value of this input. Okay, so we can go ahead, we can change it. Let's see, Emily Adams 2. I guess we haven't quite finished everything yet. We need to actually be able to update this after the submit button is pressed. I'm going to go back to records.php, and if you take a look at this code, what we have is we check if ID is set, and if it is, we go ahead and display the form. What we want to check up here is we need to check if our form has been submitted. So similarly to what we have below, we can just copy this. So if the form has been submitted, we want to do functionality here. Otherwise, we need to display the form. So we're going to go ahead and put what we just finished up here. Okay, there we go. So let's briefly test this. Back to edit record. So this is working fine. We submit, and we get the form submitted message. Okay, so now, obviously after the form is submitted, we need to go ahead and grab the data from the form and save it to the database. So similarly, obviously we check of that. We want to make sure that the value in the form is correct. So we want to check if numeric. Rather than getting the form data from the URL, we're going to actually get it from the form itself. So we want to get the post ID, which is set up here in the hidden field. You'll notice this is ID. So we want to make sure this is valid. So if that's numeric, otherwise we have a problem. Okay, so assuming this is all fine, we want to go ahead and grab all the data. So ID, we want to grab this from the form. And we want to get the first name. Actually, I can just copy and paste what we have here. So we get the ID, we get the first name, and we get the last name from the form. And then similarly, I think I can just copy and paste again. We want to make sure that the first name and last name fields are filled in. So we just double check that they're both not blank, otherwise we'll submit the form back in, and we just need to make sure we pass the ID value. So if they had been filled in, we can go ahead and input or save this data to the actual database. And we do this like before with prepared statements. So statement equals and in this case we're going to use an update statement. So update players, set first name, we want to set this to a question mark, and last name, question mark, and finally, oopsie, inside here, we want to make sure where ID equals question mark. So as we've been doing previously, if this works fine, we're going to continue on. Otherwise, there's some sort of issue. Okay, there we go. So the next step here, assuming this works fine, we need to bind our information, or bind our parameters to these question marks. So we're going to do that stmt and the first value again refers to the types of data that we're passing in. So we're passing in a string, and an integer. So this first field is going to be SSI, and then we're going to pass it first name, last name, and finally ID. So that's finished, and we just do statement execute, and finally close it out. Okay, so once this is all set, just down at the bottom here, we want to redirect the user. So header, so we'll redirect the user back to the view page. And I believe that's about it for this tutorial. Let's go back and just preview this, make sure everything's fine. Okay, 46. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're editing the records. Emily Jones, and not quite. There we go. MySqli. There we go. So you notice now we can edit records. You'll notice this is updated to Emily Jones. We could easily change it to something else, Emily James, submit, and that works fine. And we obviously built in protection, like if someone forgets to fill in a field, we'll get an error message. So I believe that covers it up. We've talked about how to connect to a MySqli or connect with MySqli to a MySQL database. we can view records, we can edit, delete, and add new records. So thanks for watching, and feel free to contact me either through my email, ben@killersites.com, or through the Killer Sites forums at killersites.com/community. Thanks again.